The sweltering Michigan summer air hung heavy on July 30th, 1975, a thick, oppressive blanket that mirrored the frustration bubbling within Jimmy Hoffa. He stood in the sun-drenched parking lot of the Machis Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a phone receiver pressed tightly against his ear, his voice a low growl of irritation as he spoke to his wife, Josephine Hoffa. "They stood me up," he muttered, his impatience palpable. He had been waiting for hours, his scheduled meeting with Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a prominent Detroit Mafia figure, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Mafia member, seemingly abandoned. Hoffa, a man accustomed to being waited on, not waiting, felt his temper fraying. Despite the annoyance, he promised Josephine he would be home for dinner, a familiar domestic assurance that on this particular evening would remain tragically unfulfilled. As the afternoon waned, Hoffa's green 1974 Pontiac Granville sat conspicuously in the lot. Witnesses would later recall seeing him there, a solitary figure, a titan of industry reduced to waiting. But then, an inexplicable void. One moment he was present, a man of flesh and blood, a known entity. The next he was simply gone. No struggle, no shouts, no witnesses to any altercation, any forced departure. The parking lot, a public space, offered no clues, no discarded objects, no signs of a struggle. His car, later found unlocked, yielded nothing. It was as if the ground had swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the simmering heat and the unsettling silence. The immediate absence of a body or any tangible evidence of violence only deepened the chilling mystery. Who had the power and the motive to make Jimmy Hoffa disappear so completely, so seamlessly? By 1975, Jimmy Hoffa was no ordinary man. He was a force of nature, a legend in the labor movement, but also a figure steeped in controversy and conflict. Though no longer the official president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, his influence persisted, a shadow stretching long over the union he had built into an empire. His ambition, his defiance, and his unwavering determination to reclaim his throne had transformed him into a significant threat to a delicate ecosystem of power. To the current Teamsters leadership, he was a destabilizing force. To certain elements of organized crime, he was a loose cannon, a man who knew too much and refused to be controlled. His very existence, his desire to return to the forefront, posed an existential danger to those who had benefited from his absence. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa was not merely a personal tragedy, a man lost to his family and friends. It was a calculated act, a powerful, chilling statement delivered with brutal efficiency. It resonated through the underworld, echoed in the halls of power, and sent shivers down the spines of anyone who dared to challenge the unseen forces that held sway. His vanishing act was a stark, terrifying message, a testament to the fact that some lines, once crossed, led to an irreversible fate. It hinted at a world where power was absolute, and dissent was met not with argument, but with definitive, terrifying silence. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. James Riddle Hoffa, born in 1913, emerged from humble beginnings, destined not for obscurity, but for a relentless ascent to power. His early life in Indiana was marked by a fierce tenacity, a shrewd intellect, and an almost instinctual understanding of leverage. By his early 20s, he was already orchestrating labor strikes, exhibiting a strategic mind far beyond his years. He was not merely a participant, he was a leader, charismatic and aggressive, capable of galvanizing workers and confronting management with unyielding resolve. His methods, while often criticized for their ruthlessness, were undeniably effective, carving out a reputation for him as a formidable advocate for the working man. He built his influence brick by brick, protest by protest, always pushing, always demanding more. This relentless drive propelled him through the ranks of the labor movement. The 1950s saw his star rise dramatically, culminating in his election as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. This was not just any union. It was a behemoth, wielding unparalleled power across the American economic landscape. With over 2 million members under its umbrella, The Teamsters controlled a vast network of transportation, trucking, and logistics. Hoffa, at its helm, became a kingmaker, his decisions impacting everything from local deliveries to national supply chains. He didn't just negotiate contracts, he dictated terms, leveraging the sheer size and strategic importance of his union to secure unprecedented benefits for his members. His control extended far beyond the bargaining table, influencing industries and shaping political outcomes. Under Hoffa's leadership, the Teamsters became an almost impenetrable fortress of influence. He understood that control over the movement of goods was control over the nation's commerce. This insight allowed him to exert pressure on corporations and politicians alike, creating a vast web of obligations and dependencies. No truck moved without the Teamsters' blessing. No major industry could operate without their cooperation. This immense leverage made Hoffa a figure of both admiration and fear, a man whose word could make or break fortunes. He was a master tactician, always several steps ahead, always consolidating power. His vision transformed the Teamsters from a simple union into an economic and political force, a colossus that seemed invincible. However, such vast and unchecked power rarely goes unnoticed, nor does it remain untainted. The sheer scale of the Teamsters' influence, coupled with Hoffa's aggressive tactics, inevitably drew unwanted attention. Scrutiny from federal agencies, rival unions, and even within his own organization began to intensify. The price of such immense power, Hoffa would soon discover, was a constant battle for control, a relentless defense against those who sought to dismantle his empire or, worse, to exploit it for their own nefarious ends. The very mechanisms that built his power would also become the conduits for its corruption. The shadow of his growing influence began to lengthen, hinting at darker alliances and more dangerous connections. The lines between legitimate union activities and illicit dealings blurred, as the Teamsters' immense resources became an irresistible magnet for those operating outside the law. Hoffa's ambition, once his greatest strength, now threatened to become a perilous vulnerability. It was becoming increasingly clear that his unrivaled control over such a powerful organization would soon lead him down a path where the stakes were higher, the players more ruthless, and the consequences potentially fatal. His journey from an Indiana strikebreaker to a national power broker was nearing a precipice, where the very foundation of his influence would attract the kind of partners who could offer immense support, but also demand an even greater and far more dangerous price. The federal investigations throughout the 1950s and 1960s meticulously documented the growing entanglement of Jimmy Hoffa with organized crime. What began as a series of discreet maneuvers to solidify union power soon blossomed into a full-blown transactional relationship, a Faustian bargain struck in the shadowy corners of American commerce. The Teamsters, under Hoffa's iron fist, controlled the largest, most lucrative pension fund in the nation, a veritable gold mine for those with the audacity and connections to tap into it. For the Mafia, this fund represented an unparalleled opportunity, a seemingly endless spigot of capital to finance their sprawling enterprises. They eagerly accessed these vast sums, primarily channeling them into the construction and operation of glittering Las Vegas casinos, transforming the desert landscape into a playground for illicit profits. In return, organized crime offered Hoffa an invaluable, albeit dangerous, commodity: muscle and influence. Their enforcers ensured union loyalty, intimidated rivals, and suppressed dissent, allowing Hoffa to consolidate his grip on the Teamsters with brutal efficiency. The lines between legitimate union activities and criminal coercion blurred irrevocably, creating a symbiotic relationship that propelled both Hoffa and the Mafia to unprecedented levels of power. He used their underground network to quash insurgencies within the union, to silence troublesome employers, and to expand the Teamsters' reach into new territories, effectively operating with an unofficial, untouchable enforcement arm. The seriousness of these connections did not escape the attention of federal authorities. Robert F. Kennedy, then a relentless chief counsel for the Senate Labor Rackets Committee, spearheaded a series of highly publicized hearings that exposed Hoffa's deep and disturbing ties to the underworld. Kennedy viewed Hoffa not merely as a corrupt labor leader, but as a dangerous figure who had allowed organized crime to infiltrate and exploit one of America's most vital economic institutions. The hearings painted a damning picture of Hoffa's methods, revealing a pattern of intimidation, bribery, and outright criminal conspiracy. Kennedy's relentless pursuit of Hoffa became a personal crusade, a televised battle of wills between two formidable, unyielding men. Despite Hoffa's defiant denials and clever evasions, the weight of evidence eventually became insurmountable. In 1964, after years of investigations and legal battles, Jimmy Hoffa was convicted on charges of jury tampering and pension fund fraud. The verdict sent shockwaves through the labor movement and the criminal underworld alike. The man who had defied so many, who had seemed untouchable, was finally brought to justice. His sentence was a staggering 13 years in federal prison, a term that, for most men, would signify the absolute end of their career, their influence, and their freedom. As the prison gates clanged shut behind him, many believed that the Hoffa era had definitively ended. His empire, built on a foundation of ambition and illicit alliances, appeared to have crumbled. The Teamsters, though still powerful, would surely move on, electing new leadership, severing ties with the criminal elements that had so marred Hoffa's tenure. Yet, for Jimmy Hoffa, prison was not the end. It was merely a pause, a temporary setback in his relentless quest for ultimate power. The confinement only fueled his resentment and his determination. He viewed his incarceration not as a just punishment, but as a political persecution, a conspiracy by his enemies to remove him from the stage. From behind bars, he continued to pull strings, to exert influence, and to plan his inevitable return. The outside world might have considered him defeated, but Hoffa himself harbored no such illusions. He was merely biding his time, meticulously plotting his resurgence, convinced that his rightful place was at the helm of the Teamsters once more. His ambition, far from being extinguished, burned brighter than ever, promising a dramatic and dangerous twist to his already legendary story. The seemingly insurmountable prison sentence, however, took an unexpected turn with President Richard Nixon's intervention. In 1971, Nixon, facing his own political pressures and perhaps seeking a strategic alliance, commuted Hoffa's sentence. This act of presidential clemency was not without its stringent conditions. The most crucial stipulation, a binding clause designed to prevent Hoffa from reigniting his previous power base, explicitly barred him from any union activities until 1980. The intention was clear: to neutralize his influence within the Teamsters, allowing a new, less controversial leadership to solidify its control without his formidable presence. Yet, those who believed Jimmy Hoffa would quietly fade into retirement gravely underestimated his indomitable will and profound sense of entitlement. The ink was barely dry on the commutation papers before Hoffa began to publicly defy the restrictions. He saw the condition as an affront, an unjust attempt to strip him of what he considered his life's work and his rightful legacy. With characteristic audacity, he announced his unequivocal intent to reclaim the Teamsters' presidency, dismissing the presidential decree as an illegal overreach. His public pronouncements were not mere boasts. They were declarations of war against anyone who stood in his way, including the very government that had just granted him his freedom. This overt defiance drastically altered the delicate power dynamics that had settled during his incarceration. His absence had allowed new alliances to form, new leaders to emerge within the Teamsters, and perhaps most critically, new arrangements to be struck between various organized crime families who had come to rely on the union's vast resources. Hoffa's proclaimed return threatened to destabilize this fragile balance, upending the carefully constructed hierarchies and financial pipelines that had taken root in his absence. He was not just challenging the Teamsters' current leadership. He was challenging the entire underworld ecosystem that depended on the union's stability. The stakes escalated dramatically, transforming a personal ambition into a potentially bloody power struggle with far-reaching consequences. Federal investigators, ever vigilant, began to pick up whispers from their informants. Reports flooded in, detailing the escalating tensions behind the scenes. Mob figures who had once been Hoffa's closest allies were now reportedly growing agitated. their carefully cultivated schemes jeopardized by his disruptive presence. Informants suggested that Hoffa was receiving increasingly stern warnings to back off, to accept his forced retirement gracefully, and to allow the new order to remain undisturbed. These were not polite requests. They were thinly veiled threats, reminders of the ruthless nature of the forces he was now challenging. The messages conveyed a stark choice: retreat or face dire consequences. But Hoffa, fueled by a potent cocktail of resentment, ambition, and a deeply ingrained belief in his own invincibility, ignored every single warning. He dismissed the threats as bluster, believing that his past power and connections would shield him, or that he could somehow outmaneuver these new adversaries just as he had so many before. His refusal to yield, his unwavering determination to reclaim his throne, set him on an irreversible collision course. He was hurtling towards in confrontation with powerful unseen forces, entities that operated outside the bounds of law and conventional morality, and whose patience for his defiance was rapidly wearing thin. The stage was set for a dramatic and tragic conclusion to a life lived on the edge of power and peril. The path Hoffa had stubbornly chosen led directly to a fateful appointment on July 30th, 1975, a day that would forever etch itself into the annals of American mystery. His destination was the Mafia Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, a seemingly innocuous suburban eatery that was about to become the backdrop for one of the most enduring disappearances in history. Hoffa believed he was meeting with two formidable figures from the criminal underworld: Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a prominent Detroit Mafia figure, and Anthony Tony Provenzano, a powerful New Jersey Mafia member. The meeting's purpose, shrouded in layers of speculation and hushed whispers, was understood to be either a final, desperate attempt to resolve the escalating disputes that had simmered since Hoffa's release, or more ominously, a confrontation intended to escalate them beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant parking lot, a familiar setting for countless informal power negotiations, around 2:00 p.m. He was alone, a testament to either his unwavering confidence or a fatal misjudgment of the danger he faced. The summer sun beat down, but an internal chill of impatience must have begun to creep in as minutes turned into a prolonged wait. He paced, perhaps checked his watch, his frustration mounting with each passing moment that his expected companions failed to appear. This wasn't just a casual lunch, this was a high-stakes encounter, and being kept waiting was a deliberate power play, a subtle insult, or a chilling precursor to something far more sinister. At approximately 2:15 p.m., unable to contain his growing irritation, Hoffa made a phone call to his wife, Josephine Hoffa. His voice, likely tinged with annoyance, conveyed his predicament. He had been stood up. He explained that Giacalone and Provenzano were nowhere to be found, leaving him alone in the bustling parking lot. This call, a mundane act of marital communication, would later become a crucial, agonizing detail in the unfolding mystery, the last confirmed instance of his voice. Several witnesses, patrons, and employees of the Mafia Red Fox later corroborated seeing Hoffa waiting in the parking lot, a solitary figure radiating an increasing sense of impatience and bewilderment. They observed him, perhaps pacing near his car, a green 1974 Pontiac Grandville, visible yet oddly isolated amidst the everyday comings and goings of the restaurant. As the afternoon wore on, Hoffa's presence at the Mafia Red Fox faded into the background. The next significant development occurred later that same day when authorities discovered his distinctive green 1974 Pontiac Grandville abandoned in the restaurant's parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked, an unusual detail for a man as security-conscious as Hoffa, yet there were no overt signs of violence or forced entry. The car sat silently, a metallic sentinel bearing witness to an absence it could not explain. Its very stillness became a screaming testament to the unsettling void Hoffa had left behind. The discovery of the abandoned car marked a terrifying turning point. Despite extensive interviews and painstaking searches, no confirmed witnesses ever came forward to say they saw Jimmy Hoffa enter another vehicle, or leave the parking lot under his own volition. The bustling restaurant, the public setting, the broad daylight, none of it seemed to matter. After that brief, frustrating phone call to Josephine and the observations of a few restaurant goers, the trail went utterly and completely cold. Jimmy Hoffa, the once indomitable labor leader, the man who had defied presidents and challenged the mob, simply vanished. The Marcus Red Fox parking lot, once a mere asphalt expanse, transformed into a permanent question mark. The last known location of a man swallowed whole by an unseen, merciless force. His disappearance was not merely an unsolved case. It was a chilling declaration. A stark reminder of the ultimate price of power and defiance in a world where shadows held sway. The immediate aftermath of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance triggered one of the most extensive and perplexing FBI investigations in American history. Federal agents descended upon Bloomfield Township, then spread their net across the nation, driven by the urgency of a high-profile figure vanishing without a trace. Thousands of interviews were conducted, painstakingly documenting every interaction, every sighting, every rumor, no matter how remote. Search parties scoured vast tracts of land, dredging lakes and rivers, digging through remote fields and abandoned buildings, following every conceivable lead with a grim determination. Wiretaps were authorized, grand juries convened, and countless hours were spent poring over financial records, phone logs, and informant reports. The resources poured into locating Hoffa and unraveling his fate were staggering, a testament to his enduring significance and the profound mystery surrounding his vanishing. Yet, despite this unprecedented mobilization of federal power, the earth seemed to have simply swallowed him whole. Years passed marked by false leads, sensational theories, and the slow, agonizing erosion of hope for his family. The initial flurry of activity gradually subsided, replaced by a persistent, simmering undercurrent of investigation that never truly ceased. Finally, in 1982, 7 years after he was last seen, Jimmy Hoffa was legally declared dead. This declaration, however, offered no true closure. It was merely a legal formality acknowledging an irrefutable absence, a bureaucratic stamp on a personal tragedy. It confirmed his physical departure but did nothing to answer the haunting questions that continued to plague his loved ones and the nation. The critical fact remained, stark and unyielding. No one has ever been charged with his murder, and no physical evidence has definitively established how he died or where his body might rest. The case of Jimmy Hoffa, therefore, remains an enduring enigma, a testament to the shadows that can consume even the most powerful figures. Only probabilities remain, whispered theories and informed speculation, none of which have ever hardened into irrefutable proof. The most widely accepted narratives point to his murder at the hands of the Mafia, a brutal consequence of his defiant attempts to reclaim his union power, which threatened to disrupt established criminal enterprises and lucrative pension fund schemes. Specific names, like Anthony Tony Provenzano, have frequently surfaced in these theories. Painted as the orchestrator of Hoffa's demise due to their bitter personal feud, and Hoffa's perceived threat to Provenzano's criminal interests within the Teamsters. Another prominent theory suggests that Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, the Detroit Mafia figure Hoffa was supposed to meet, played a pivotal role, perhaps luring him to his fate. Yet, these remain probabilities, tantalizingly close to the truth but forever out of reach of definitive confirmation. The precise location of his remains, the exact method of his death, and the full cast of characters involved in his final moments have eluded investigators for decades. The FBI, despite its tireless efforts and the immense resources dedicated to the case, has never been able to produce the conclusive evidence required for prosecution. This profound lack of resolution leaves a lasting shadow on American history, a constant, unsettling reminder that even in a nation priding itself on justice and accountability, some truths can be buried so deeply they may never see the light of day. Why, despite such immense resources, such persistent investigation, and such widespread public interest, does the case of Jimmy Hoffa remain officially unsolved? That question echoes through the decades, a haunting testament to the ultimate price of power, the ruthlessness of unseen forces, and the enduring, chilling power of an unresolved mystery